Hi, today we're assembling a XRX 150. The XRS is the same except our steering wheel hub and our extra lights. We're removing the shipping support bracket and we're going to install all 4 shocks is the first thing we're going to do on this cart. Taylor's going to show you how to raise the back of the cart to install this shock. We're on a double pivot here. That's real easy if you'll pull back on the lower arm and lift the top one like he did here. Install your bolts. We're going to put the bolts in both sides before tightening on the rear, and then we're going to tighten all 4 bolts up. Now we're going to move to the front of the cart. First thing we're going to assemble is the shock. We're going to lower down the A-frame and slide the bolt through the shock. We're going to go to the opposite side and do the same thing. Then we're going to tighten all of our bolts on this assembly as we go. We're going to install our lower strut bolt. There is a flat square on this bolt that goes in the squared hole on the bottom. It's easier to turn that in alignment before you drop it down. And then when you draw your nut up, we're going to tighten it by hand to make sure we pull that flat down in. You'll line up your cotter pin hole, and you want this fairly snug. You'll line up your cotter pin hole like Taylor's doing now. Slide your cotter pin in and lock it down. We're going to check the top nut. Even though we don't remove the cotter pin, we always want to check it and make sure it's tight. The factory installed it. If it was loose, you have to take it out and tighten it. We're going to go and cut off our cotter pins now. Fold them over where they're nice and smooth where no one gets cut on them, and cut them off. We're now going to check our rack and pinion bolts. The factory has installed these, but we do check them. Now we're going to move over to our tie rod ends and our tie rods. We're going to check our jam nuts. Now we're checking our jam nuts and tightening them, but at the same time we'll come back and align the front end later. We're going to check our tie rod end nut. The factory has installed it. We don't remove our cotter pins from these. We check them to see how tight they are. Same thing on the bottom. And then we're going to clip our cotter pins off cleanly. Then we're going to install the rubber dust cover seal. It has a ring on it, so make sure you get in the groove. We're going to remove our fender bolts. We do Loctite these before reinstalling them. Remember, we're doing both sides of the cart. We'll go back and forth here. Doesn't take a lot of Loctite, just on the end of the thread there, because it'll go with the thread as you screw it in. With the 6mm bolts, we only want to lightly snug them with our impact. Then we're going to go back and check them with our wrench. Then we're going to check the fender bolts themselves that hold it to the bracket. Always check these because they're usually loose from the factory. Now what we're doing here, we're going to adjust the chain. Taylor's breaking the top nut loose. And how you adjust this chain is you go from underneath, and there's a nut underneath that's a 17 millimeter that you loosen or tighten by hand and tighten your top back up. We're checking the exhaust nuts. The factory has installed these, but normally you will find that they are fairly loose. Just lightly snug them up. We're going to install the battery. And for filling the battery and checking your battery, you need to go to the battery section of the video. We're going to go ahead and hook the battery up, our positive and our negative cables. And while you do this, you need to check your cables and make sure the ends are not loose on the wire, as well as that they're not going to get down and hit the exhaust. If they are, we need to zip tie them up to the other harness. What we're doing here is we're going back over it with a 10 millimeter and a ratchet, because with the screwdriver you'll find they'll come loose. So we're just lightly snugging them up. We're going to install our battery cover and our battery strap. Now what we're doing, again, the factory's installed the hub. Taylor did not remove the cotter pin. We do check to make sure they're tight. And then we're going to trim off our cotter pin and install our rubber dust covers. Once again, make sure you get the groove locked in so they're not falling off on you. Your valve cores are left loose from the factory because they installed the tire and put it on the bead lock. You'll need to snug them up. And what we like is 10 to 12 pounds of air in our tires. We're going to install both rear wheels. These nuts are 15 millimeter on the aluminum wheels, and they're 14 if you have the steel wheel on the S model. We use an 18 volt battery operated impact and slowly bring them down evenly and then give them a good jar with your impact. While we have this out, we're going to move to the front and put our front wheels on. It's the same pattern we were using just a minute ago. Spin your wheel to make sure that your caliper is free. And we're installing the rear fender at this time. Your bolt goes through the frame and into the bracket. Again, we like to Loctite this bolt. Now we've used a forklift to do this, and we've set it back on the ground. What we're doing here is bending our seat frame forward. If you don't do that, when you install the headrest, it will hit the gas tank edge and tear the headrest. Now we're putting the rear rack on. You're going to kind of hold it up evenly, and you're going to start both your front bolts. After installing your bolt, you're going to go ahead and tighten it up good and snug on both sides. Then we're going to go to the rear of the rack and install the rack support brackets. There's 8 millimeter bolts with nuts in your kit for them. we put the bolt from the outside to the in. And with our impact, we'll snug these up good and tight. Then we're going to install our tail light. We're going to check our Phillips headed screws, tighten them up, just snug them down. Then we're going to install the gas tank. We're going to hand start each of these bolts and then run them down with our impact. Now we're going to install the wires to the tail light. It plugs into the loom that's hanging below your fuel tank. Then we're going to zip tie it nice and neatly to our frame rails. We like to kind of run them underneath the rail so that they're hidden and not going to get cut with anything you put in the top of your rack on the rear. Now what we're showing you here is our fuel line. We like cutting this extra bit off the end. Then to install it, it's going to go on the top of the petcock, and any loose wires or hanging down will zip tie back up. Now what we're doing here, we're using a manual vacuum gauge to pre-fill the filter and the carburetor with fuel to allow us to start this unit when we're ready very easily. Then we're going to install the vacuum line back onto the carburetor. Make sure it's pushed all the way on, and then our circlip in place. Zip tie up any loose lines at this point. We're ready to move on to our steering wheel hub. It is on the XRS 150. And what we're doing here is some of these hubs are not tapped all the way through. So we're taking a 1/4 inch drill bit and lightly opening them up on the one side that's not tapped so that we can install this hub in the steering wheel. On an XRS, you would just install the steering wheel at this point. We've got our 3 center bolts to install. We like to snug these bolts up by hand with the socket and ratchet. They're 6 millimeters, so we don't want to over torque them and stretch the bolt. Then we're going to pull our wires up through our hub. We do not use the white wires that come in the steering wheel adapter kit. These green wires plug straight into the back of the horn. We'll place the center of the horn button, and Taylor's now showing you how to plug them in. Doesn't matter which wire goes on which side. And you're going to install your Allen headed bolts. Again, we're going to lightly snug these down after we pull them up. And we're going to do that by hand in the end. We're going to engage our key and check our headlights and our horn. Now we're going to install the turn indicators. You want to be careful tightening up the nut on this. You can pull the threads out of the plastic. Lightly snug it up with your wrench. Don't over pull it. Now that we've got that, we're going to put our flag mount and nut in position. We're going to hook up our wires to our turn indicators. Of course, green goes to green, and your off color of green goes to the off color of green. We're going to zip tie these wires along the back of the... Now we're going to zip tie the wiring loom to the bottom of the rack, as well as underneath. You're going to make sure everything's zip tied up nice and neatly. We're going to start installing our cage. We're going to hang our front bolt in first, and our washer and nut. You have an R washer is what they call this on these. They're concaved on one side. It always goes into your inner bar. We're showing you here that our front bolt did not go through after installing the rear one, so we're going to take the rear one back out. We're going to lift it off the cart, turn the bar at an angle. The bolt will go right through in most cases. Reinstall the rear bar. Now we're going to go back and put the nut and washer on the front. Then we're going to install the nut and washer in the rear. Again, leave these loose until all the cage is put together. Now after installing the rear bolt, we're going to put our side bar on the cart next. A lot of these will have a burr in the hole. Install your bolt, washer, and nut. Then we'll put in our top bolt. By leaving the bars loose, you can work the bars in direction you need to line this up to be able to start your bolts. Again, we use an 18-volt cordless impact wrench on these. I'm going to back it back off a little bit so it's still loose so I can move the rest of the bolts. I pulled my bar over towards it to line it up. Now we're going to install the crossbar above the gas tank. And what I do is pull the two top cage racks together and use my impact to pull it up. Putting the H bar in. Just following the same procedure. We're going to start all 4 bolts before tightening any bolts. Now I like tightening up the crossbar, the side bars, and the H bar. Then we'll get us a wrench, 12 millimeter, and do our through bolts. We're now ready to install the headlight bracket. On the XRX model, we move these all the way to the inside, up against the rear view mirror bracket, so that our bikini top will fit around the outside and the headlight will fit between the frame rail. We install these down so that tree branches will not knock them off. Then we're going to tighten our screws from the top and then back them up with a wrench on the bottom to snug them up good and tight. We're checking our alignment to each other, just eyeballing straight across them. On this particular one, the lights did not fit up inside, so I'm lightly bending the brackets out so they go through nice and easily. Running again, all bolts we run from the outside to the inside. We'll tighten up our bolt, holding our headlight in position. Now we're going to install the wiring loom. You have to take the left side cover off and the foam off, and we'll run the wiring loom plugs in down at the floor. The bracket's already there with the plug in it at the headlight plug-in. You're going to run the loom up underneath the frame rail. We do put a lot of zip ties on this to keep it positioned to where it doesn't get loose and get into your feet. And we reinstall our foam and our foam cover. We like to use electrical tape to hold it in position. The foam cover just Velcros back down, and we'll retie our strings. We'll continue on with our wiring loom. On these headlights there is a 3-wire plug-in and a 2-wire. We're only going to use the 3-wire, that's what's on our loom. The 2-wire will neatly tuck in and fold up and zip tie down to the wiring loom. Now that we've got our headlights all tucked away, we're going to go ahead and put our headrest on. You just force these down into position, just push them down firmly and they'll go right in for you. We're going to install our foams on top to go underneath our bikini top. And again, we like using electrical tape on this because there's no sharp edges left to poke through your top. Now that we got our foams fastened down, we're going to install the bikini top. This Velcros all the way around except the 2 snaps. Slide it over the front edge first like Taylor's done here. Then we're going to install our center Velcro tabs. We're going to pull it around our edges and attach our Velcro. Now that we've done that, we're going to turn our carburetor. We're going to screw these carburetors in about 2 full rounds before starting the unit up. And the next thing we're going to do, we're going to check the oil. You must check the oil in all units prior to starting a unit. And checking the oil in all these, you screw your dipstick back in to check it. You have slash marks halfway up the dipstick, which is the full level. Now after we've checked our oil, we definitely want to run this unit for about 5 or 10 minutes warming it up, and we'll lower our idle, and then we'll take you on a test drive. Always check your forward and reverse gearing, and we thank you for choosing Go Power Sports for your go-kart needs.